Hi, I'm Debbie Moraes, and this is Legal Matters, a program designed to address some of the interesting and critical matters facing consumers and businesses today. It's legal information, practical solutions, and straight talk about a wide variety of issues, and we're happy that you're with us. In recent segments, we've discussed mediation, we've discussed Social Security, and are about to discuss Social Security, and last installment, we were discussing workers' compensation. At the end of every program, we invite our viewers to email us questions that are pertaining to the segment. And most recently, when we were discussing workers' compensation, we received a question by email, which we are going to present to our guests, Bob Audette and Lenny Cordeiro from the law firm Audette, Bizarre, Cordeiro, and Grassa Law Firm. Welcome. Ready?
Thanks. Yes, I'm ready.
So, a worker in a factory is injured. He says he has a disc bulge. He says he's out of work. He points out that he has no prior education. He knows that there's a process that he has to go through, but he says, I have no prior education. Apart from money, what about training or retraining? Can you address that as one of the benefits or one of the issues with workers' compensation?
Sure. Yeah. I think we started to talk about this a little bit, Deb, and I'll address it from the Rhode Island perspective, and then Lenny, I think, probably can chime in and add on and fill us in on the Mass perspective. But again, first question for a gentleman like this is, how bad is the disc? How badly hurt is he? And what kind of job did he do? The fact that he doesn't have much education leads one to believe that he probably did a fairly physical job. And if the injury is serious enough to prevent him from working long-term at his former job or permanently at his former job, rehabilitation or job retraining could play a role. First goal of the workers' comp system is always to get someone better and get them back to their regular job. And if that can't happen, the next question is will the employer have a lighter duty job position for the employee? The insurance carriers typically work hard with the employers to try to get them to take people back. If that's exhausted, the next step could be rehabilitation. Some insurance companies will provide rehabilitation specialists who will meet with clients, interview them, get their aptitudes, try to help them with a resume development or job searching. There's also the Donnelly Center in Rhode Island on Blackstone Boulevard in Providence that provides rehabilitation services. And there are also private counselors out there that an employee, possibly with the help of an attorney, can go out and hire himself, who would help identify what that person's strengths, talents might be, and then what type of schooling or training they might need to go on and better themselves and end up back in the workforce again. So rehab is out there. It's part of the system. Obviously, there's a strong interest amongst the insurance carriers to keep it as inexpensive as possible. Mm-hmm. They'd rather not pay for 4 years of college education if they can help it. They'd rather get someone trained quickly and back in the workplace as quickly and simply as they can.
And Lenny, in the Massachusetts area?
Very similar to what Bob said. I'll just add on that, it is a cost-benefit analysis for insurance companies. Certainly a lot of it does depend on the extent of the injury. In Massachusetts, they have a unique way of approaching it that's a little bit different than Rhode Island. Massachusetts, they do have a department that's strictly dedicated to vocational counseling and rehabilitation. In fact, during the course of a person receiving benefits under the Mass system, it's very common for the department to set up interviews with a vocational counselor just to see how they're doing and perhaps to determine whether or not there might be some vocational potential for a particular injured employee. But one thing that's also interesting about the Mass system is that once a person gets to a point where if it turns out there's a long-term problem and the person ends up commuting or settling his claim with the insurance carrier, unlike Rhode Island, in Massachusetts, the case will stay open for two purposes. One, the person can continue to receive medical treatment under the Massachusetts system for any ailments that may continue to bother them that are related to the injury. And second, and most importantly, is that vocational assistance stays open for 2 years after a person settles his case or her case, so that if, in fact, let's say, there's a serious injury with this gentleman who has limited educational background, and, he's done one particular job most of his adult life, and now he settles his case because the limits of the system don't permit him to go much further, but he has trouble locating, employment in the community. He has the resources of the Department of Vocational Education and Rehabilitation to consult with a counselor to see if there are any alternatives available for that person to either be retrained or re-educated to learn something new. And that's at the cost of the insurance company.
Oh, it is.
Yeah, I mean, in fact, we have we can't mention names, obviously, but we had a recent client in Massachusetts who had quite a serious injury, was a clerical support type person, and eventually settled a claim with the insurance company because just couldn't go back to her prior job no matter how hard she tried. And then subsequently went into medical training through the Department of Vocational Rehabilitation in Massachusetts after her settlement, and has now got a career in the medical field, which was totally unrelated to what she had done previously. So she was able to collect workers' comp benefits, get her medical condition treated as much as she could up until that point, and then relearn a whole new job, a whole new vocation, and started off on that afterwards. So that was a nice success story.
I'm amazed to hear that there's such disparity between Massachusetts, which would carry medical benefits, and Rhode Island, which does not.
Right.
Are there other issues that you can bring up relative to the benefits and maybe even the differences in benefits between the two states?
Sure.
Yeah, there's similarities and differences. And many similarities. When clients first come into our office, I like to talk about workers' comp in general, the themes that would carry over to whatever state in the union you basically work in, and there were some generalities about workers' comp, but then you get it down to the specifics. Mass is one of only 5 or 6, and maybe 6 states in the United States that once you settle a claim, medical remains open. Rhode Island is much more in the mainstream. There's about 44 states that do it like Rhode Island does. So it's fairly uncommon to have a system like Mass where the medical does stay open. I guess weekly benefits are the first thing people ask us about when they come in for a comp case. Well, I'm going to be out of work for a while. How am I going to survive? How am I going to pay my bills? Rhode Island system pays you 75% of your net pay when you're out on a job-related injury. They figure out a gross average. It gets a little complicated. We won't get into all the specifics, but they'll figure out a gross average weekly pay for you. They call it an average weekly wage. They'll figure out how many people in your household and reduce you to a net or a spendable base based on those people in the household. It's not your net take-home pay, but it's based on tables that the state puts out every year. And then they pay you 75% of that net. Depending on how many people in the household and how much you make, most people in Rhode Island would average about 60 to 65% of their gross pay in their workers' comp checks. And there's a 3-day waiting period before you start receiving. So the first 3 days you don't get paid workers' comp. You start on day 4.
And what happens relative to TDI? Is that separate and apart from what goes on with workers' comp while you're waiting, or?
Yeah, big difference between Rhode Island and Mass with TDI.
Huge
There is no
difference,
TDI in Mass. So and in Rhode Island, TDI is their temporary disability insurance, which will pay people for up to 6 months for a disability. Now, TDI is designed to pay you for a non-work-related injury or illness. Workers' comp, of course, pays you for work-related injuries or illnesses, but there's a wonderful thing that happens. If your comp claim is being contested for whatever reason and benefits are being delayed, you can apply for TDI, and as long as you show the TDI system that you filed a claim for workers' comp and are going to the workers' comp court to pursue that claim, TDI will pay you. And once you receive your workers' comp benefits, TDI simply gets paid back, and then your workers' comp benefits continue on from there. So we can say in good conscience to most legitimately injured people, you will get a check from either TDI or workers' comp within 4 to 6 weeks after your injury at the outset, at the farthest out. Where in Massachusetts, you can wait much, much longer, and I'll let Lenny get into that in more detail.
Yeah, that is a significant difference. Massachusetts, as Bob indicated, does not have a TDI system. The temporary disability insurance system is really recognized in only about 14 states. Rhode Island is one of them. So what ends up happening in Massachusetts is someone who gets injured, and if their claim does become contested at some point, they have to go through a pretty lengthy process before they start to see some income coming in. Some employees are fortunate enough to have companies that have private disability policies. So if they become injured or disabled, it will compensate them either in a short-term disability format and in some cases long-term disability. And then when workers' compensation kicks in, at some point, what happens typically is that there's a credit that's given to the company that ended up paying out those benefits. As far as benefit structure, in the Massachusetts system, you have a combination of roughly 7 years of total and partial benefits that a person can receive. It's calculated based on a 52-week average, so there's one difference. Usually in Rhode Island, they go back 13 weeks. In Massachusetts, they go back a year.